Newcastle. North East travel every 15 minutes.
Alfie and Charlie at breakfast, and Twitter as well. If you want to join in with the quiz on that, it's at BBC Newcastle. So thousands of us jet off there on holiday every year with direct flights out of Newcastle, but a council's plans to persuade local firms to do business in Dubai in the United Arab Emirates, the UAE, has attracted strong criticism.
Yes, Durham County Council will host an event next week to tell businesses from the area about the benefits of exporting to Dubai. And this event's sponsored by the Dubai Department of Tourism and Commerce.
But one human rights group says the Dubai and UAE has a poor human rights record, and encouraging firms to do business there sends out the wrong message.
Let's speak to Rori Donaghy, who's from the Emirates Centre for Human Rights. Rory, in times of austerity, why shouldn't a council in another country encourage firms to export?
When that country has a poor human rights record like the UAE, it's imperative that businesses uphold human rights. The UN Human Rights Council's guiding principles for business and human rights states that where local law violates international law, businesses must go above and beyond local obligations to follow international standards. And in the UAE, migrant workers suffer terrible abuses, so local partners where you export may be in violation of international standards. Unions are banned. There's a kafala sponsorship system for employees, which is akin to modern-day slavery. And when workers strike, as with a recent Arab take strike, they are deported to their own countries with immediate termination of employment.
But where do we stop? Because if you decide not to trade with countries with poor human rights records, you wouldn't have many countries left to trade with. I mean, China, there was a lot of coverage around the Beijing Olympics and whether China should have been granted that. It's often criticised over its human rights record. Should we not trade?
No, what I'm saying is that where we do engage, we have to be prepared to uphold and advocate for international law to be met. So if businesses are to be exporting to Dubai, they must ensure that human rights are not being abused in the supply chain. I mean, and that comes into an amendment to the UK Companies Act in 2011, which requires human rights information to be included in annual reports for companies. So companies have a responsibility to ensure that human rights are not being violated at some point in the supply chain.
Okay, so the key here is it just something on paper, or is it something that's being done in meetings, face-to-face meetings? We spoke to Alexander Ayman, who's from the Institute of Directors, which represents UK businesses. A lot of its members trade with Dubai. Let's just listen to what he had to say on this.
David Cameron himself said he makes no apology for linking Britain to the fastest growing parts of the world. UAE is a growing marketplace for British products and services, and businesses will look to that market and want to use it, and I don't think we should be apologetic about that. Businesses are not world policemen. They're out there to try and compete and be successful in some very, very difficult domestic economic circumstances.
And he went on, Mr. Ayman, to say that trade can help bring about positive change in these countries.
It's clear that markets that have a great involvement of British businesses learn British ethics, learn British language, learn British culture, learn and understand that concepts of good play and high kind of sense of moral and ethical value. And I think that has to be a good thing.
So what's your response to that?
Well, first of all, I wouldn't say that I would be advocating the exporting of British culture. That sounds a little colonialist to me. But what I would say is that businesses, where they engage, they have to speak out properly to ensure that that's the only way there will be development in these countries. I mean,
but can you imagine, Rory? I mean, sitting around the table, there is this reality, isn't there, of if you're organising a deal, a multi-million-pound deal that could bring jobs to a country such as ours, which needs some help with its economy, and you say, well, the thing is, we're not going to broker this unless you do A, B, and C, and it's connected to human rights, or unless you admit A, B, and C. You're not really going to do that in a negotiation, are you?
Well, I mean, I think that if the deal hinges on the abuse of thousands of migrant workers in the UAE, or people being tortured, such as the 3 Brits who are currently in a Dubai prison, then we have a moral obligation to stand up for it. These are rights that we take for granted, and whether we're trying to maintain...
for morals in business?
Well, there must be, and the UN Human Rights Council and their guiding principles set out a very strong argument and a requirement for businesses to ensure that human rights are protected. I think society is increasingly expecting companies to protect human rights, and businesses must answer to that.
Yes, I'm just thinking of, horrendous recent news stories, say about the clothing factories, where, there have been so many fatalities in India and Bangladesh, Pakistan, because the working conditions didn't comply with the same working conditions we would have here in Britain, and yet, we buy their clothes.
Exactly, and I think that tragedy has seen an outpouring of outrage, really, against the companies whom we buy stuff from, and so consumers are increasingly demanding that these companies uphold human rights and ensure that the supply chain doesn't involve serious violations of human rights.
Thank you, Rory. Rori Donaghy, who is from the Emirates Centre for Human Rights. Durham County Council said it didn't want to put up anyone for interview on this.
But in a statement, Stuart Watkins, Managing Director of Business Durham, the council organisation hosting this event, said it was offering local companies opportunities they may not otherwise be aware of, particularly the chance to grow their exports into new areas. And he added that in this case, Business Durham was responding to opportunities highlighted by UK trade and investment under a new government business initiative.
And we also asked the Embassy of the UAE if it wanted to comment, but despite contacting it several times over the course of the last week, it hasn't given us a statement, and it hasn't put up anyone for interview.
However, the Foreign and Commonwealth Office gave us this statement. It said the UK is committed to making it quicker and easier for British businesses and Gulf states to do business together, but it added the UK's relationship with the UAE allows it to discuss important issues such as human rights, even if we do not always agree.
Alfie and Charlie at breakfast.
I like listening to breaking